Welcome to Financial Insider Weekly. I'm your host, Michael Gray, CPA. My guest today is Judy Barber. Judy is a consultant and mediator who assists clients in resolving the overlap between family and money matters so families are better equipped to make sound financial, succession, philanthropic, and estate planning decisions. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. In her work with families who share an operating business or co-ownership interests, Ms. Barber provides a process that identifies how the overlap between family and the enterprise impacts on current and future planning. She helps the family define objectives and works through the obstacles to create and implement an action plan that strengthens family bonds as well as meet the best interests of the enterprise. Ms. Barber is a founding member of the American Bar Association Committee on Psychological and Emotional Issues of Estate and Financial Planning. So I am really delighted to have Judy as a guest here today. She's well known in the Silicon Valley community, works with quite a few of the lawyers and other professionals in the area. Judy, thanks for being a guest today.
It's great to be here, Mike. Thank you.
Okay. So today we're going to be talking about raising money-smart kids in the midst of affluence. And so I think every viewer who's a parent is interested in how to raise money-smart kids. So I hope this will be a great interview that they'll be maybe even wanting to go online and look at again and again. Judy, how does the personal money history influence how parents teach children about money habits?
Well, we're all ingrained with what we experienced when we were kids, and I remember working with one couple where the mom was saying, you know, can't we just let our 12-year-old buy his own bike? And Dad's saying, no, I had to buy my own bike, and so he should have to buy his own bike. And his wife said, but you have all these toys. You know, you've got a truck, and you've got a Porsche, and you have a Jaguar, and you have motorcycles, and you've got a whole nother, separate garage, for your boat, and you're telling your kid that, that he has to buy his own bike. That doesn't make sense to me. It's not the same. And so they, ended up working it out and coming to some compromise. But he felt so strongly that because he bought that bike,
So
his son, even though he was very successful in his entrepreneurial endeavors, and we want to kind of hang on to those values when in fact there's a balance between our experience and the reality of young children's and older children's, what's going on with them. So
when we say he bought his own bike, I mean basically this gentleman, when he was a child, he had to earn the money himself to buy his own bike.
Right, that's right.
And he wanted his child to do the same.
Right.
And Mom said, come on.
Well, I mean, I think the thing is that what kind of model is this? He has all these toys himself, but he's saying to his kid, well, you don't get to have this toy unless you pay for it. And it's not that there's not a value. Yeah. And I think the other thing is the mom thought that what would happen is the son couldn't at 12 couldn't get all that money together, and he'd lose interest. And she wanted him to be able to be independent and get on his bike and go to his friends' houses.
She wanted him to ride the bike, and Dad wanted him to earn the bike.
That's right, exactly. That's exactly
so
right.
They had a little bit different ways of looking at the issue, and but I mean, and again, the thing related to the toys, I mean, he had earned the money to get those toys, and so here's the reward. And so maybe he was trying to communicate that to the child in some way. And I guess there has to be a balance somehow.
Well, I think that's true, and I think that at that particular time he didn't want to bother with sitting down and saying, look, this is something that's important. It's important for you to earn your own money. He was so stuck on, but I had to buy my own bike, so he should have to buy his, rather than looking at that larger picture of the importance of earning and how it creates self-esteem and independence when you earn your own money.
So I think part of the issue is particularly in many cases of affluent parents, and particularly if they're entrepreneurial, they've earned it themselves, they're so darn busy That, you know, to find the time to really communicate these things with their kids. So they want to see them earn their own money, to earn their own bike, if you will, to buy it themselves, but not to talk to them a little bit about, you know, the why and the wherefore. And so something will get lost there in the process.
Right. Well, you know, it is hard. I mean, I think parents are torn between responsibilities with their kids and work and community, and but there is a message. I mean, I think that's the thing with our kids, even though we don't like it. First of all, we're their models, whether we like it or not. And number two, that there's a message in what we say. Actually, there's more in what we do than what we say.
Yeah. So James Dobson may not be our favorite sometimes psychologist because, you know, but it's Californians.
Right.
But on the other hand, he raised a really good point, and that is, you know, just the importance of being a good role model, and that he said, you know, children catch their values from their parents. And
they catch it from what we do, not what we say.
Yeah.
It's really.
And so they're watching all the time to see what you're going to do.
Right. No, it's really true. I mean, I think that's the, you know, one of the hardest things about being a parent is realizing that our behavior is what impacts on our kids, how we operate, what we do. And what we tell them they should or shouldn't do is probably less important than what they see, what we do.
Yes. Well, there's the old saying, Zig Ziglar talked about his mother. He says, your children more attention paid to what you do than what you say. Sentence sermon. There's another thing too, though. You know, when we talk about these things that influence kids and so forth, so I think about, you know, many of these people that I've seen over the years, speakers and so forth. There's another fellow, I don't know if you've heard of him or not, but he's a wonderful guy. His name is Michael Vance, and I'm reading some of his stuff right now, or maybe I should say Mike Vance, because it seems to be preferred to be called that. Mike was actually the first dean of Disney University. He talks about the conversation at the top of the stairs. Have you heard this before?
No, but that's a great vision.
Yes.
It's a great vision.
It's the conversation at the top of the stairs. It's the things that kids hear incidentally, maybe that you don't intend for them to hear, that many times are really, really influential in their lives.
Right. That's right.
And he talked about an experience that he had, and then we'll have to get into some more questions. But that when he was a kid, he wrote his name with rocks on his neighbor's doorstep, because he had called on the neighbor and they weren't there. But he wanted them to know that he had come. And so this gentleman opened the door and saw his name, and he went and talked to his mother. And he says, you know, Mike is a really creative kid, you know, to do that. That stuck in Mike's mind. And now today, or for many years, he taught in organizations, including Apple Computer and General Electric and so forth, how to build creative organizations. So anyway, it's really something.
Really important.
All right, let's move on. What promotes healthy attitudes towards money?
One of the things that is important is young people learning how to manage money. And I do have a bias about allowances. I think allowances are basically for children to learn how to manage money. And chores are things that people do around the house. And to figure out what's really going to work in terms of how much money your children can actually take care of. And a parent may have an idea in their head. I remember when my daughter was I think she was probably in 6th grade, and I wanted her to, maybe it was 7th grade, I wanted her to have her lunch money all at the beginning of the week, so that she'd be able to pay for lunch on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. She didn't lose the money, she just forgot to take it.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
So I had to realize this is just where she is right now. And I said to myself, she is going to be able to manage $25 sometime in her life, but right now she can't. So every morning, you know, the money was in her drawer, but I'd pull it out and say, here's your $5 for lunch. Well, 6 months later, she could manage the $25. So it's really not scolding them, not saying, not having expectations that don't fit for who they are, but what is it can they do now? How much money can they manage? What does that really mean? And I think the other thing that's important is to be clear when there is an allowance about what you're going to pay for and what you're not going to pay for. So, you know, that when you go in your favorite Walgreens or whatever and they go directly to the toys, that there's clarity about, well, I will buy you something or I won't buy you, or maybe you need to set money aside. You know, I go into the store sometime and, you know, you have like the 7-year-olds pouting and crying because they want something and mom didn't really say, yes, I'm going to, you know, yes, I'm going to buy this, or no, I'm not going to buy it. And so there ends up being a tussle that isn't really necessary if in fact the parents are clear about what they're going to buy and what the children are going to buy, even though it's a very small piece, you know, of things. So, you know, those are ways to try and think ahead about what's the best thing. And also each kid isn't going to be the same. You may have one that squirrels money away and saves it and, you know, doesn't spend any of it and wants you to pay for everything, and the other one who's spending money all of the time, and just having to adjust to interacting in a way that those, taking into account those differences.
Okay. How are parents role models for earning, saving, and charitable giving?
Well, as we said earlier, you know, our kids go by what we do rather than what we say. And so I remember one young person saying, you know, it's like my mom has all this, you know, buys $400 shoes and I only get $25 a week. You know, what does that say about me? But I think that in terms of the charitable giving, it's really important to include kids and to remember that kids are, until they're about 12 or 13, they're pretty concrete. So it means going to the homeless shelter, or it means collecting cans for food. I remember one mom with her teenage daughter, and all of their friends were having birthday parties, and finally the mom said, you know, do you really need all these gifts? You know, wouldn't it be better if you all chipped in what money you spend on gifts, and then you guys could give it to a charity? And these two young teenagers started doing that. So all of a sudden, all of the parties, they came and had cake and enjoyed the day, but they brought money and they put it in a, and put it toward some kind of charitable. There's something called, which a client told me about, it's so fabulous, it's called the good deed jar. And what the good deed jar is that when someone in the family does something good, like dad puts mom's car in the garage, the mom has to put money in the good deed jar. You know, if sister makes brother's bed, then the brother has to put money in the good deed jar, and you know, maybe it's $5 or $3. And then when the jar is full, they sit down as a family and they decide where they're going to make the charity donation. So they do that as a family. And the mom and dad said the reason that they did it is because we're fighting all the time about who was going to do what. But this good deed jar really took that away, because it was about, well, what can I do for my brother or my sister that then he'll put money in the jar and we'll have more money to give away.
So yeah, there are a lot of little strategies or ideas. I was in a church at one time. They had little tithing boxes for the kids, and so each day the child would put a little bit of money into this tithing box and then bring it to the church, you know, on Sundays.
Right.
And they had, of course, their little Thanksgiving song or whatever for the children, and you know, it was very nice and a good way to go about it. But like you said, yeah, to take kids, and we've had other seminars, not seminars, but shows. As I told you, folks look at online, and John Hopkins and I have our Thanksgiving program where we talk about community giving.
Yes, and he's been very involved.
Yes, and that's his thing right
yes,
now.
It
totally,
is.
Says he's basically retired from law, and so now all of his efforts going into community work. And John's just a wonderful guy. And anyway, so how can we actually get it, like you said, make it concrete? You know, we can go down to the family and help out at Martha's Kitchen, or whatever, serving food to the homeless, or helping out in other ways, in addition to, you know, seeing these organizations and saying, okay, well, we want to support this work.
That's right.
And it may be community theater, or who knows, you know, whatever your interest is.
That's right.
Okay. Let's see here. So we talked a little bit about the allowance. Why don't we go ahead and move along? How can parents teach consistent money habits?
It means that they need to be consistent. So, for example, and I certainly know that I did this with my daughter, is that, you know, so you're supposed to give them the money on Monday, and you know, the week flies by and it's Friday.
Yes.
And so they don't get the allowance till Friday, and maybe they've had the money. But the reality is that it's also a message that it's not important. And so having a consistency about, you know, when you give the allowance, and there's a clarity about what that allowance is about. I you know, also again, having them have the opportunity to see how other people live is really critical as well, in terms of having them have a sense of taking care of money. And again, the other thing is to understand the level of whether your children are concrete or whether they're, you know, whether they're more abstract. And often young people who are maybe even up to 12 or 13, it may be often for them to try and save money for more than a week or two. You take a 14 or 15-year-old who's abstract and saying, you know, when I turn 16, I really want to be able to drive a car. And so my parents have said I'm going to have to pay for half the, you know, the car insurance. I'm going to hold that in my head, and I'm going to save that money. And you can do that at 14, but you can't do that at 10.
Okay. How can parents allow children to work through their own money mistakes?
I think there are two things. I think one thing is to support them in saying, you know, you made a mistake, but not have a harshness about it, or a punishment about it. And you know, where I see this is often with teenagers who have a credit card, debit card. You know, they've gone over the limit, and so there has to be some kind of payback. There has to be a consequence. And, you know, maybe it's in terms of earning, you know, doing more work around the house. Maybe it has to do with giving time charitably. But it's important that there's a consequence, because there is a consequence as we grow older. You know, there are lots of consequences. So, so saying, oh, well, you won't do that again, isn't really helpful. It's it's taking it seriously.
Yeah. I mean, the real critical time for this that comes to my mind is, you know, when kids go to college.
Right.
And that's when many of them actually get their first credit card. Well, because why? There's credit card applications all over the place when you go there. And it is a convenience for buying books and so forth. But it is also a time that, you know, many of them have trouble managing that and controlling their spending and so forth. And so, you know, sometimes they dig themselves into holes that you know, you can't really save them from. But
you know, I've had that experience in working with families, and that's why it's important to have that conversation, you know, ahead of time, that just because the credit card company says you can charge $1,000 or $500, they're not thinking about actually whether you can earn that or whether you can pay it back. What they want is for you to give them, you know, pay
18%
them
18% interest.
Right. They want the installments so that they get the interest. So I think that's a really important comment that you're making, because that's something that parents need to sit down with and have that conversation with them before they go to college. And I think the other thing that sometimes parents say, well, here's this much money, or we're going to put this much money in your checking account, without saying to the young person, for example, who's going to college, probably after they've been there at least a semester, how much money do you think you need? You know, so the parents have some idea in their head rather than giving the young person the opportunity to think through, well, what, particularly after they've been there for a semester, like what are their expenses?
Yeah. Okay. So there are various stages, obviously, that kids go through from childhood through adulthood. How do parents shape a child's interest and ability to learn financial skills?
You know, I think that you know what you said earlier, in terms of them really learning, like learning from listening and hearing. So part of it is, so for example, in one situation I worked with a family where the parents reported that their son needed a new baseball mitt. And so he went online and found the quality that he wanted, but the stores that actually had it, because he felt like he needed to put his hand in it. It wasn't gonna, he just couldn't buy it on the internet. But by the time he'd done his research, he could say to his, I think he did it with his mom, you know, Mom, this is this is what I want. So I know where we can get it, and I think that it's the cheapest, but it has the quality that I want. Well, that's a tremendous, I mean, that young person picked up a lot of cues about what his parents valued. His parents valued good things, that, you know, will wear well, but also to do it at a low price, even in the context of a very wealthy family. So them having that opportunity to research, to take an opportunity to see what something is going to cost, or go to 3 or 4 stores, when in fact in families often they don't need to do that, but it's a great lesson.
Yeah, and the world is changing, you know, beyond what I have a comprehension of, you know, with all these little applications and so forth. Now they can scan and do internet comparisons with their little iPhone or whatever, or smartphones. Oh my gosh! So there's even opportunities beyond, you know, what we may know.
That's right.
Unfortunately, it's hurting some stores, as we're seeing. Best Buy is saying we're tired of being the showroom for Amazon.com. You know.
You know, that's true for bookstores as well, actually.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sad. Okay. Now, how do parents who understand concrete and abstract thinking learn about the limits of a child's success in handling money from a young age through college?
So it's just important to understand that kids are, you know, the parents, you may have a very articulate, smart kid, but that doesn't mean at 7 he's thinking like a 14-year-old. He's still thinking probably as a 7-year-old, where things are very concrete, rather than as a 14-year-old who may be able to be thinking about what he or she wants to do when they graduate from college. And so parents understanding, and again, this isn't like, it's not something that's rigid, but to pay attention to how much your child can take in. And you know, you may say, well, he's 10 or 11 or 12 and he can have X amount of money and he should be able to take care of it, when in fact perhaps he can't. Yeah.
So this sort of gets into the area that one is, of course, knowledge and intellectual capability.
Right.
Okay. So your child may be very smart, may be able to solve complex mathematical formulas, may you know, appreciate art, whatever, you know, have these different capabilities, may be very articulate. On the other hand, there's a difference between knowledge and judgment.
Well, yeah, it's like, so you're so smart, how come you can't remember your lunch money? Or you can't remember your lunch? Or how come it's the 4th time in this month that I've had to take your books to school? Probably not books anymore. Maybe it's an iPad these days. But how is it that you're so smart? Well, it's because they're still concrete thinkers. They're not sitting down saying, like, what is it that I need to have for today? Now, by the time you're 12, you know, getting into 7th grade, if you're lucky, or 6th grade, you have that, you have that knowledge. And of course, there are differences, but just it has to do with understanding expectations and having them be realistic, so your child doesn't end up feeling like he's disappointed his parents because he hasn't been able to do what they expected him to do.
Okay. Got about 30 seconds. Do you think you could throw out a 30-second thought, or going to throw in the towel?
No, I can. You know, again, I think the most important thing is that when you reach these milestones of allowance, when you make these decisions about how much they're going to have or what they're going to have in college, is who is this person? Who is this child? Who is this young adult? Who is this adolescent? And to be thinking about what's the long-term consequence of what you're doing, and can you plan to some extent about the future so that you can see what may come down the road.
Okay. Judy, thank you so much for joining me as a guest.
It's great to be here, Mike.
Oh, this is a wonderful topic, and folks, we hope again that we've given you maybe seeds for thought and for discussion with your own family, your own kids, and your own advisors. And we'll see you next time on Financial Insider Weekly.